Hello everyone. I am so excited to start this series on the rise and fall of the Tudors. And in this episode is obviously the birth of a king. But what's important to remember is that when we discuss the Tudors, we all think about Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. They're probably the two names that come to mind at first when we say the Tudors. But we have to start where it all began. And it started with Henry VII of England. And what an incredible story. Henry VII was born on the 28th January 1457 at Pembroke Castle. He is the son of Margaret Beaufort and of Edmund Tudor, first Earl of Richmond. Now I think we need to pause and to discuss who were these two people, because otherwise you don't really understand Henry VII. Margaret Beaufort was a descendant of Joan of Gaunt, son of King Edward III, who was basically the founder of the House of Lancaster and who was linked to the House of Plantagenet. But she doesn't come from the branch that is the most legitimate. She comes from the branch of John of Gaunt's third wife, who had been his mistress for a very long time, Catherine Swynford. It means that there were lots of bad relations. We are in the time where everything fell apart for England, where there were so many difficulties, so many rivalries, so many sibling rivalries, where people were declared legitimate but not fit to rule, where they were declared illegitimate, where they had to fight for their birthrights. And Margaret Beaufort was from that line, a very difficult line to the throne. At the same time, still, there was a claim to the throne. Edmund Tudor, the first Earl of Richmond, was a half-brother of King VI of England, the member of the Welsh Tudors of Penmynedd. And it was a very strong, powerful Welsh noble family. Edmund died 3 months before his son was born, and Margaret Beaufort was only 13 when she gave birth to Henry. I want you to understand that almost everything was against Henry. He was raised by his uncle Jasper Tudor, a Lancastrian, and William Herbert, a supporter of the Yorkist branch of the House of Plantagenet. But that's where it became very interesting. So let's start with Henry VII's early years. What happened when he was young that made him the man that he became? But first, let's go back with the death of Edmund Tudor, who was captured while fighting for Henry VI in South Wales against the Yorkists. He died shortly afterwards, and his younger brother Jasper Tudor decided to protect his young widow and his son. When Edward IV became king in 1461, Jasper Tudor went into exile abroad, and at that moment that the Yorkist William Herbert assumed the guardianship of Margaret Beaufort and her son Henry. But he was a Yorkist, and obviously there were Lancastrians. Henry lived in the Herbert household until 1469, when Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, also known as the Kingmaker, went over to the Lancastrians. Herbert was captured fighting for the Yorkists and executed by Warwick. Warwick restored Henry VI in 1470, and that's why his name, the Kingmaker. Jasper Tudor returned from exile and came back and brought the young Henry to court with him. Unfortunately, that time of peace is not going to last. After not even 1 year, Edward IV regained the throne in 1471, and that time Henry fled with the other Lancastrians to Brittany. So here we really have a childhood where he's constantly in trouble, it's extremely unstable, and it's almost as if, the throne itself the monarchy itself, the English monarchy, is unstable. People have different claims to the thrones, and they are fighting for power. And Henry VII is going to play, and he doesn't know yet, but he's going to play a huge role in this. And the way he's raised, the way he saw people die, people being executed, people fighting during battles, people regaining their thrones, fighting against for their thrones. He saw his uncle fleeing and coming back, and now he's fleeing himself. Henry is going to spend the next 14 years under the protection of Francis II, Duke of Brittany. When he fell ill, there were negotiations to hand over Henry to English envoys. But at the last moment where he was about to be handed over, there was news that actually the Duke of Brittany was fine and had recovered. So Henry fled and took refuge in a monastery. He claimed sanctuary until the English envoys departed. And I swear, that there are these moments where your life is hanging by a thread. And that's exactly what happened to Henry VII. His life was constantly in danger. He was a Lancastrian. He had a claim, even though he's known as a usurper by many, he had a claim to the English throne through his mother and his father. He had royal blood in him. And in many ways, it's how he was also raised. But I would argue that more importantly, he embodied the value of a warrior king. He was not the type of person that just received the crown or the throne on a plate to him. He also knew that there were constant battles and fighting between the two houses, and that in a way, someone needed to bring everyone together. Did he do it perfectly? Not really. And that's where we have the birth of a king, through blood and battle. In 1483, Edward IV died. And that's where we have the story of the Princes of the Tower with his son, Edward VI, and Richard, that were sent to the Tower under the protection of their uncle, Richard III. We all know that what actually happened is that Richard III declared himself king as a way to, that was maybe not the right time here to have such a young king on the throne. Everything was so debatable. There were so many fights and there was so many instability that, not just Richard, but people of Parliament would agree that it might not have been the right time. And also the Woodvilles, the mother of these boys, Elizabeth Woodville, and her family were really hated by the people, by the nobles. And so Richard III became King of England. That's when Margaret Beaufort started saying, oh, wait a minute. If Richard III, who's not in her head, in line, you know what I mean? It should have been Edward V, the son of Edward IV, can become king, then let me, so that can be an alternative person to this man. Richard III was a strong hierarchist and had also many, many enemies, as many allies as we know. Margaret Beaufort's son, Henry, the future Henry VII, was at the time still in France, and at Rennes Cathedral, on Christmas Day 1483, Henry pledged to marry Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter of Edward IV, in order to put an end to the War of the Roses, an end to the war between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. With money, supplies and support from the Duke of Brittany, Henry tried to land in England. But unfortunately, there were already networks of spies and everyone was conspiring, so it honestly didn't work. But he didn't stop there. He gained more and more support, not only from the French, but also from the Woodvilles and from anyone who was really against Richard III. He ended up with an army of 6,000 men, ready to go to battle for him. But here I want you to imagine, what is the end goal? The end goal is to take the throne. The end goal is to overthrow Richard III, to put himself as King of England and to marry Elizabeth of York and to declare her Queen of England. Fate finally struck on the 22nd August 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth, where Henry, with his army, defied Richard III's army. But not only this, Henry killed Richard III on the battlefield. Richard's death ended in itself the War of the Roses because, as I said, Henry Lancastrian pledged to marry Elizabeth of York. But what type of king was he about to become? Well, his reign is very complex and sometimes very much overlooked, probably because people are so keen to look at what Henry VIII did. But you have historians like Nathan Amin, who absolutely brings back to life Henry VII and what he accomplished before he became king and when he became king. Let's dive into the reign of Henry VII. One of the prime was like to find allies at court, to find peace and to find ways of knowing who was his true allies and who would still become problematic. It was not an easy reign for Henry VII. He started a new dynasty, the Tudor dynasty, and that was not an easy task. It's actually very dangerous and very difficult. There were other people with stronger claim to the throne than him, and he knew it. In 1486, he married Elizabeth of York at Westminster Abbey. He was 29 years old and she was 20. The problem is that his reign was plagued with rebellions, with people with stronger claim, like the Edward Earl of Warwick, the 10-year-old son of Edward's fourth brother, George, Duke of Clarence, and the brother of Margaret, Paul. And Henry VII didn't show mercy. He arrested him and put him in the Tower of London. Henry faced several rebellions over the next 12 years. There was the 1486 rebellion of the Stafford brothers. There was the Lincoln rebellion in support of Lambert Simnel, a boy that claimed that to be Edward of Warwick was one of the prisoners in the tower, one of the princes in the tower. He claimed to be that. Obviously, we can choose to believe it or not. I don't think that the princes in the tower survived Richard III's reign. I don't know what happened to them, but I don't believe that they survived. And there was just so much trouble during his reign. His reign was constantly unstable. And what I find so remarkable with his reign and the way he ruled is that he could show mercy and he could show true cruelty. You see how he treated Margaret Paul, like making sure that she would marry, under her status, that that what he did to her brother. But at the same time, he did pardon Rob. He did try to find peace and to make the country stable and to make the country move forward from all these wars beforehand. But that was just not an easy task for Henry VII. In 1490, a young Fleming, Perkin Warbeck, appeared and claimed to be Richard of Shrewsbury, so the other prince in the tower. Warbeck won the support of Edward's fourth sister, Margaret, Duchess of Burgundy. In 1490, this threat didn't just last for a few months, it lasted for years. So it all started in 1490, but it's only in 1497 where actually Warbeck landed in Cornwall with a few thousand troops and then was captured and exiled. That's again when you see this kind of different type of personality with Henry VII. So he could show complete mercy at times and could completely be merciless at other times. And that is so interesting when you really look at Henry VII's reign and what he had to do to ensure the continuity, the prosperity of the Tudor dynasty. With Elizabeth of York, they're going to have 8 children. 4 of them are going to become adults. Arthur, Henry, the future Henry VIII, Margaret and Mary. Truth Henry VII is also known for being such a good king in terms of economy. He was just very good with finances and he just made the right decision to give financial stability to England. But again, this was not just an easy task. He had to deal with greedy advisors. He had to, discuss taxation, and that was obviously not something that was very popular. That was not popular back then, that's not popular today. But it is something he had to deal with because the country had been at war and had been torn apart for so long. He also needed to make drastic economic decisions. Important point for Henry VII is the fact that he is going to have some problem with the French in terms of foreign policies. It's not all good and nice. And though he had the support of the Duke of Brittany, it doesn't mean that he had the full support of the French king. He probably would have liked to support a Yorkist rather than supporting Henry. Henry is going to change the way he's going to do politics, and he knows that to really establish a dynasty, you need to have strong dynastic alliances. And the way he did it was obviously to marry Elizabeth of York. But what he wanted for his heir, Arthur, was a very strong alliance with another strong, even, let's say, the most powerful country in Europe, Spain. He concluded the Treaty of Medina del Campo, by which his son Arthur, Prince of Wales, was married to Catherine of Aragon. He also concluded the Treaty of Perpetual Peace for Scotland, the first treaty between England and Scotland for almost 2 centuries, which betrothed his daughter Margaret Tudor to King James IV of Scotland. By doing that, he hoped to stop the old alliance between Scotland and France, but also he was just so smart to use his children to make strong dynastic alliances and to position England as a very strong European country. You have to imagine, as I said, England had been ravaged by civil war, really. And here he was finding stability through Arthur and Catherine of Aragon, but also through Margaret Tudor and Scotland. And that is 2 very powerful moves. But obviously the end of his reign is more complex and more sad. In 1502, Arthur, Prince of Wales, died of English-sweating sickness. Henry II's son, the other Henry, Duke of York, became heir apparent to the throne. When his wife Elizabeth of York died a year later, Henry VII was completely shattered, and he was someone who showed it. He showed his complete distress. And that's what makes me think sometimes, or very often actually, that Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, though they started as this, dynastic alliance, the marriage had a very strong political purpose. I believe that they came to love one another. Henry VII wanted to maintain the Spanish alliance. It was one of the ways to really put England back into European politics, into the European political scene as a very strong player. So he arranged a papal dispensation from Pope Julius II for Prince Henry to marry his brother's widow Catherine. One interesting fact about Henry VII, I think, as well, is the fact that there was no well-known royal mistresses. Maybe he had, but there was no one that was favoured, that was seen. And that's why, as well, I think it became in the end a love marriage between him and Elizabeth of York. And I find it quite beautiful because it is so rare when you look at royal couples. But it did exist even in France. In the end, on the 21st April 1509, Henry VII gave his last breath at Richmond Palace. He died of tuberculosis, and he was buried in a chapel he commissioned in Westminster Abbey, next to his wife Elizabeth. He was then succeeded by his son, Henry VIII. But that, my friend, it's for another video. I hope you'll enjoy this series. Let me know in the comments what you know about Henry VII and how you would like to share with all of us. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time. Bye!